Today I wanted to talk about sidechaining. What is it? How to sidechain efficiently and precisely, inevitably sidechain like a pro. Now, before we get into any of that, let's talk about compressors for a second. I'm not going to get too in depth with them, but essentially we know that we use compressors to control dynamics. So if a sound has a very loud point and a very quiet point, we can use compressors to shorten that range so that the loud stuff isn't as loud and the quiet stuff isn't as quiet, and we have more of an equilibrium in terms of volume. Now, when compressors are being used without sidechain activated, we use them, compressors are looking for the sound that they're physically on. So if you're sending, if I'm sending my bass track and I want to, or my bass bus, and I want to compress my entire bass bus, my compressor is listening to the bass bus, reacting to the bass bus, and compressing the bass bus. However, when you activate sidechain, what you're telling the compressor to do is to look for an external source to trigger the compressor. So instead of the compressor being triggered by the sound that it's affecting, it's being triggered by a separate external sound that then still affects the sound that the compressor's on, but it's being triggered from an external source. Now, we use sidechain in most types of electronic music, and that's expanding into pretty much all genres, except some of the super acoustic ones. But we use sidechaining to really amplify our mixes, to reduce the volumes of things while the drums happen, so the drums can punch through the mix. Now, this is only one application of sidechaining. Sidechaining is something that has existed in studios for a very long time. It was not always just about reducing volume. It was about, just anytime you wanted to trigger something from an external source, if your device had a sidechain, you would use a sidechain. But that's a whole nother story, a whole nother video. We're just here focusing on sidechaining technically to improve your mix. And also in house music, it really does help improve the groove of your song. It helps give that pumping effect. But in any case, we generally use this type of sidechaining to improve our mixes so we can have very loud drums and very loud sounds working together and all punching through the mix nice and strong. Now, what generally happens when you sidechain, the first thing we're taught, right, is to sidechain from the kick, because especially in a house song or really any music, the kick, any electronic music and pretty much pop music these days, the kick is a really big part of the song. It's usually huge and fat, and it takes up a lot of space. So if we listen to this kick I have here, right, it's pretty heavy, it's pretty punchy. It's not like, a 1970s rock kick that's really just there in the background. This is up front in your face, and it's a part of the track, it's a part of the groove. Now, when you first learn about sidechaining, what I first learned was, sidechain your kick. That's what you want your compressor, your sidechain compressor to react to, is the kick. So the first thing you're going to do is say, okay, you know what? Let's have the kick trigger my sidechain. The problem that happens when you sidechain with your actual kick is you have no control over how much of the sound is being sidechained. So let me give you a demonstration. If we drop our release time to 1 millisecond and we take a look at what our compressor is doing while we're playing it. So we're just going to hear the kick, but we're going to be seeing the compressor react to the kick. We're not listening to the bass yet. So we can see what's happening though. Notice how for the entire duration of the kick, the sidechain is happening, right? And if you notice too, well, here it's wider because we have that double kick. But if you notice, we don't have any control. And if we listen to the bass being played as well at the same time, too much of that bass is being removed. And in contrast, let me show you what it sounds like without any sidechaining. So for those of you who don't know about sidechaining, you can really hear what's happening. Without sidechaining, listen how the bass sits like it's sitting on top of the drums instead of being in the song with the drums. right? That bass, that especially because this is a very plucky bass, it's sitting, that pluck transient is fighting with the kick itself. So the kick all of a sudden disappears, and then the bass sounds like it's sitting on top of everything. And it also loses its groove in house music because of that pumping effect from the compressor reacting to every kick on every beat. You get that pumping groove that that you get from sidechaining. So that's no sidechaining. This is too much sidechaining, in my opinion, because it's not grooving anymore. Now it feels very stagnant. It feels very forced. And the reason for that is the compressor will trigger as long as there's information coming from the sidechain that you've selected. So, and even though we don't see much happening here, Ableton does pick up quite a bit of what we don't see. Right, so we have these huge gashes in the volume of the bass that we can't control. We can't shorten at all. We can increase by increasing the release. But right, the one thing to note too is the release doesn't trigger until the sound has, till the sidechain sound has stopped. So meaning that anything that we add here on the release is adding to the time of the kick itself. It's not from the time from when the transient happens. It's the release kicks in from when the time that the sidechain doesn't detect an input anymore. So listen to how much of the sound we lose when we start to add in some release. Right, and in some cases, the compressor doesn't even have time to reach back to its full volume and let all of the bass volume through. And this is interesting because this is what I see a lot of early producers doing, is sidechaining from their kick and then adding a release onto it. And what I always find them happen is that they increase the output because they realize, oh shit, this compressor is making my sound too quiet. But it's not that it is making it too quiet, but because you're adding a release when you don't need to. Now, if you have a really tight kick, maybe this is going to work, but I just don't like the ability to not have any control of how tight I want the sidechain to be. Maybe not for this specific bass, but there's other sounds that, like maybe higher pitch synths, that I don't want to compress for such a long time, or sidechain for such a long time. I just want them to have a little bit so that the kick transient still can come through the mix, because those high frequency sounds are not going to cause too much issues with the body of the kick because they're in a higher register. So my solution, and I shouldn't say it's my solution, this is a solution I think I learned from, I think it was Deadmau5 the first time I saw it. I've seen Mr. Bill talk about it. Mr. Bill talks about a bunch of different things. He also talks about the EQ. And the EQ, what the EQ is on the sidechain is setting a range for the sidechain to listen to. So instead of listening to the whole signal that's coming in, you use the EQ to find a range. Well, let's set the release. Now we got to turn the release up. But again, to me, I feel like you still have to then turn the gain up. It's possible. This does work, and it is pretty foolproof. Not all the time though. And that's the reason why I don't like to use it. I want my sidechain to be exact and precise every time, and I don't want to rely on the EQ. Now, if you prefer the EQ route, there's definitely ways to make it work. But I think the way that I learned from Deadmau5, it's really a much better way, a much more efficient way, a much more reliable way. One of the issues too, that when you're actually sidechaining the kick, for example, like we don't need this double kick to re-trigger the sidechain. But so if you have more complex drums, the more complex your sidechain is going to be. And generally, you don't always want that. Like maybe you want some of those kicks to fall behind the instruments because you don't want them to punch through so much. Maybe they just don't need to because the trigger that happened for the first sidechain or for the first kick is long enough to catch the tail or the transient of the next one. So there's a lot of factors that come into play when you're still trying to use the kick, and I like to simplify it, right? So I'm going to turn off the EQ. I'm going to leave my release around 30. because that's where I like to have it around for 128 BPM. That's another thing to note is depending on the tempo you're at, you're going to need different release times because if you're at a slower tempo, a faster release time might be too fast, right? You might need it to be a little longer to cover more of the kick that's happening at a slower tempo. So the release is something you want to play around and find where's a sweet spot for you. I find 30 milliseconds is a really good place for 128 BPM. 25 to like 35. I think 40 is when it starts to get too much. But what I end up doing is I use a specific channel that's muted called SC for sidechain. And all this is an operator with a sine wave that has a 0 millisecond attack and a 1 millisecond decay. So we literally just get a clip sound, a click sound, I should say. And I just have these two devices on here just to push the volume a bit so I don't have to increase the gain. This gain knob here is just for the input. So you can crank it, and if it's distorting, that's okay. It's not eating up any headroom. It's not causing any clipping. It's just overloading the input for this, which is okay because we want, when we're sidechaining bass, especially in house music, I want to remove all of the sound when the kick happens. And that's why I also want to be more precise, is because if you can remove all of the sound for a shorter period of time, it's much better and for your mix than reducing a little bit or half of the sound for a longer period of time. So you can be more aggressive, but also more precise. So we have the sidechain going, and this is all it is. So if we listen to what's happening now with just the bass and the kick soloed, and we look at what's happening, notice how we have a much more reasonable slope. And again, we can shorten this if we need to. We can extend it if we need to, right, which I'm not going to go there. But that's where what I really like is that you really have full control over it, because at the end of the day, you're only sending 1 millisecond, even with the EQ when you're using it. The problem is you don't really know how much. You can listen to it, but do you know it for sure it's 1 millisecond? No. Do you need to know exact numbers? It's not end all be all. I think it helps. Sometimes, feeling things out, it works better for you. And hey, no one can tell you that anything different. But it is important to understand your actual values at the end of the day, I'd say. So now we have a much more, so we'll listen to the whole track. So now the bass punches through just enough, the kick punches through just enough. Everything feels like it's working together and melding together. And at the end of the day, we have complete control over how long, how tight, how aggressive our sidechain is. Well, I hope this helped you guys. Thanks for watching. If you like the content, please subscribe, please like, please tell your friends. It helps me keep doing what I love and sharing as much information as I can with everyone. I'll see you on the next one.